Hello, this is a little tutorial on how to make some little beads. So these are the 4 different type of beads that I will be showing you how to be making. So what materials you will be needing is something that you can use to quill the paper with. This is a paper quiller that I got from Michael's. It's a little bit hard to see. Let's see if I can get into the camera. But there is a little slit in the metal there that the paper can slide into, and then you slide it into that part and start spinning. Now if you don't have a quiller, what a lot of other people use or will use are just toothpicks, and they will hold it down to the best of their abilities, the ends of the paper, to be able to spin their piece on. I use toothpicks personally for being able to later put on a sealant by just popping it onto the end of the toothpick like that, and then using that to help with drying process. So if you're doing something like that, you're going to need toothpicks, a way to be able to dry your beads if you're putting a sealant coat on them. So I use these little things, which are from Squishmallow mystery boxes. So I forget which size they are exactly, but I find that this works best because it keeps just the end here sticking out, and that works perfectly for the beads. And then I can load these up quite a bit. Then you will need glue for gluing the bead closed. This is Elmer's glue that I tend to use. Works pretty good. And then I am using a water-resistant Mod Podge to be able to put a water-resistant coat on top. This one is designed to be able to go on things that are outside, so it's supposed to be outside wear. So it does help to make the beads splash proof at the very least. Then I use a sacrificial container because this doesn't always want to clean out of other containers very easily. And so this container I use mostly just because I'm not going to ever be eating anything out of this, therefore it's sacrificial. It can get damaged. You're also going to need a paintbrush to be able to put on your Mod Podge, or if you're using a sealant of some sort. You'll need scissors for cutting out your paper, a ruler to be able to measure out the beads, and I will be giving the dimensions that I use for that, and a pencil to mark out what we're going to be, where those spots are going to be for the beads. And then I use 67.7 pound or 180 GM squared paper. Here, let's see if I can pop that into the corner there. I haven't actually opened this one up yet, but this is the weight that I use. This is, if I recall correctly, I think it was a 12 by 12 inch, or it might be 11. Let me look. Yeah, it's a 12 by 12 inch square. So if you want to be able to have the same exact dimensions as my beads, this is what you're going to need to use for the weight and the size. So for the sizing, since I do things slightly differently, there are ways that you can modify it. You could do the math yourself if you are able to, because the first thing that I do is actually cut this down in half, because I use half of this length, so it's 6 inches for the beads. And once you have the piece of paper that you will be using for your piece, you will be choosing, basically for pieces like this anyways, there's a lot more pattern here and here. When you're choosing your paper for your beads, it's more of the color that's going to be shown, not so much the pattern. So this will have purple and then little bits of gold every once in a while. If I were to cut the strips for the beads this way, they'd primarily just be purple because there's not much of any gold here. But if I cut them this way, there will be more chance of it having gold in here. So to get on to the dimensions, making sure I am first cutting down, because I use the 6 inch bits. So 6 inches and 6 inches for the halves. So I will go ahead and do that real quick. Now, I like to have my proportions even for the amount of beads, which is why I use these square ones, because they allow me to do that. So I have this one, which I'm going to set aside, because this is going to be the first type of bead that I will be using for sizing. That will be for this one here. The second type of bead, we are going to take another 6 and 6. So this is the size 6 that we just did. We're going to do 6 in and then 6 on the other side, so this will become a square. So we will have 2 squares. Okay, now I have my 2 squares. I'm going to be keeping one of them because this one will be making the circular beads that we have. Now, to make this size bead, this is basically the same as this one, but just half the size. So we will be taking this little square, doing a 3-inch spot, and marking the center and cutting. There we go. Now I have these 2 pieces. This one will be for this guy. Little tiny itty bitty. Okay, and then for the very last one, this one, which is more of the bugle sort of bead, we will be cutting the strip in half. So we will be measuring, so this hole is 3 inches across, so we will be doing 1.5 inch marks. And both of these pieces will be used for the more bugle-like beads. I'm hoping I have the correct name of bead there. Alright, so those are our pieces. So let's get started with the biggest piece, or sheet of paper. The biggest bead as well, this one here. So to get these measurements, I will quickly show you. This is 1/2 inch in length. And I'm not entirely sure what the width of that is, but I do use what this is, basically, to be able to do the size that I'm using. So what we are going to do is flip the paper over this way so that the longer end is at the top here. And we have our measurer. So on one side we're going to measure our dots for where each of the lines will be by 1/2 inch. We will line it up right on the edge perfectly. So let me show you. See how that lines up with the paper just fine? That's what we want. And then go ahead and mark that all the way along. Now, for the bottom part of this, we want to actually skew this slightly so that we can have our triangles, because these are basically very long triangles for this bead. So we will be taking this ruler and putting the start point up against the 0-inch point up against the edge of the paper to start out with. And what we need is half of the space of the base of what the pieces of paper will be. So this is basically what the base of it would be, is that 1/2 inch. So we will take that, cut it in half, and mark at the 1/4 of an inch, because we need half of an inch, which is 1/4. And I like to put an X down in this corner as well, just because we will not be using this piece. This piece will be too small for when we measure. But from here, once you have this little dot, you will go ahead and mark at every 1/2 inch. And there we go. So if you have done this correctly, you should have, starting from the end point here, that we made 1/2 inch spaces in between. Now, to get the lines that we need for this, so technically the edge of this paper at the top part that we measured, is going to be a dot as well, because that starts at the 1/2 inch. While down here, the starting edge is actually past that X that I made, and is at that 1/4 inch spot. So you want to line up the dot that would essentially be the first dot at the top and match it up with the first dot of the bottom, which is that first mark that we made past the X, and draw a line. If I can get this aligned, that would be great. From here, this still is counting as a dot, and we have our second dot up at the top. The second dot will connect down into the first dot of the bottom part. And draw your line once you have that matched up. It's a little bit hard to see on this camera, sorry about that, but you can see that it creates a bit of a triangle. So now we're going to go back and forth doing that. I will do a couple more of you just so that it makes a little bit more sense. So now we have this dot, which down here will now become our next point for the next triangle. And down here is our base part, because that is where our 1/2 inch is. So you're going to line up where that point is going to be with the 1/2 inch of the base and draw your line. Again, making another triangle, now in the other direction. And again, where the point of the next one will be, which is down here, which is also going to be the highest up point that has been drawn, going to the next point that has not been used yet. So line it up and draw your line. And you will continue doing that for this whole sheet. So now for the circular bead that we will be doing, this is with the square sheet that we will be using. These I did at 1/4 inches. So we're going to do something similar like what we did with that first bead, where we are going to be taking first the top part, which we're going to be marking at every 1/4 inch. Once that's measured, the bottom needs to skew by 1/2 of what the base here is. So since we did a 1/4 inch here, we need to do an 1/8 of an inch skew down here. So mark out 1/8 of an inch mark. I like, again, to just put a little X right next to it, just between the edge of the paper and where that mark is, to indicate that we do not use this piece. And then I will move the ruler to line up with that dot, and then we will finish marking the rest of them at that 1/8 inch. And as a little tip, for the bottom part where there is an X on this side, you can also put an X on this side as well to mark that you will not be using this little sliver of a piece. And it's the same concept as well for drawing our lines. At the bottom where our X is, we do not count the edge of the paper as our first dot, but up here at the top, we do consider this to be the first dot at the edge of our paper. So we line up the ruler at the top with the edge of the paper, and then measure, or not measure, but then we line it up down to the first dot that we have down on, if I can get this lined up again, that would be nice. The first one's always the hardest to me. And go ahead and draw that down. So we will not be using this little sliver here that we just made as a bead, but then we continue to go back and forth to create more of the triangles, and these will be the dimensions for the circular bead. Just making sure that when you line these up, you move to the base and keep your ruler at where the tip of the next bead is going to be. So the tip here on this one that I just drew is here. This will be the new tip, the end that I just landed on at the bottom. Move the ruler up so that it matches to the next point up here, but that this one stays at the same point that it was. And then draw a line. So it kind of scooches up in this sort of pattern. Hopefully that makes visual sense. I know I got really confused about that when I first started, but also as a little kid at the time. So hopefully I'm not over-explaining this. Okay. And then it's very similar for this one. We are flipping it this way because we want the pieces to go this way. And this one measures pretty much the same as the circular one, same measurements and same skew. And you also do the same with the lining up the dots. So exactly the same, just different length of paper. Now for the last one, the bugle bead, these ones are the easiest, in my opinion. You take your piece of paper. The bugle beads are also at that 1/8, or not eighth, 1/4 of an inch mark. So, and you're not going to skew this one. This one just is at the 1/4 all the way down on both sides. And again on the other side. Okay, and then it's pretty simple. You just match the dots dot per dot on the opposite side. So just simple, straight, parallel lines. If I can get this lined up, that would be wonderful. That always seems to be my struggle. And you just do this all the way down. You're not trying to make a point because these are bugle beads. If you make it into a triangular piece, it's just going to taper off towards the end and give it the bead more of a curve rather than a straight edge. For a straight edge, we want these to just have a straight, well, edge. Now for this next part, I did go ahead and grab a different color because I already had a bunch of these cut up. And these are, if you're using a paper quiller like mine, might be a little bit more difficult because the paper quiller itself, how far that slit goes, is only halfway through this bit. So I like to use my finger or my nail, or sometimes I'll use the roller itself, put it on top, and just bend it so that it kind of gets a little bit of a roll going on both sides. And then from there, I insert the little slit with the paper. So that is now on there. And then you're just going to go ahead and start rolling. I like to assist the outside bit here because that doesn't always like to go. And you're just going to keep this all as centered as you can. So you can see here that this is a bit longer than this side, so I will loosen the paper a little bit and use my fingers just to kind of push it back more into a center bit. There we go. So that looks a bit more even now. And keep going. Continuously pushing the paper where I need it to be. You're going to put just a little bit of glue onto the very end there and finish rolling up the rest of the bead. I like to let it sit for a couple of seconds before I let go because sometimes they do like to just spring back open. And I like to do some final adjustments as well just to get this looking nice and pretty. And voila! You're going to be doing that same concept with all the beads, so pretty simple. But from here, for doing the coats of stuff, that's where I use the sacrificial container and my Mod Podge. This Mod Podge goes a long ways, so I always just put like a couple drops in at a time. Oh, well, that was way more than just a couple drops, but oh well. And then I will take my toothpick, line up the hole. See if I can actually use this to make it easier. Oh, if it will focus. That didn't make it any easier for me to tell what I was doing. But basically popping it onto the hole there so that it has something that it can sit on. And you can use this as your handle. Grab your paintbrush. Grab some Mod Podge on the paintbrush and just go ahead and cover it. Cover the bead. And then once it's covered, just go ahead and put it into your little drying bin. And that's pretty much it. That's the paper bead for you.